let me start. I actually want to make a confession to start with. I have actually never used GIS in my life. There are always other folks who could do that. So, okay, I've got that off my chest. But I want to say, in this summit, this last day and a half of great presentations, discussion, reinforces in my mind the incredible potential, the power of geodesign, which gets me to transform planning and design practice. And I think they're the same thing, which gets me to the premise of my presentation, which is, and it's actually the first part of this, is a challenge. Let's realize the potential of geodesign across scales and disciplines of practice to impact society's big problems. So that's the first. And then how do we do this? And this gets to the premise of my talk. Let's use the vehicle, the comprehensive plan that's done by local governments, and APA's Sustaining Places Initiative framework for integrating sustainability into the comprehensive plan as a vehicle for doing this. So actually, I'm going to start with the notion of scale. How many people recognize this image? A few people. Everyone actually should, but what this actually is a national plan from Warren Manning's and Carl's chuckling, I'll get to this. Warren Manning's 1923 plan. And Karen, I swear, and Shannon will back me up on this, I had no idea Karen was going to do a lightning talk on this when I put this in. So I'm not going to actually talk about this, but I do want to make one point. I actually borrowed this image from an article Carl wrote for Landscape Architecture magazine, I think back in 2012 maybe. But the thesis of his article was actually how landscape architecture and city and regional planning started as the same profession back in the 19th century and then diverged. And that's a theme that transdisciplinary is a theme I'm going to return to. But I do want to say a few more words about Warren Manning, because he was the ultimate geodesigner across scales. And his dad was a nurseryman, so he grew up in the nursery, was a plants expert. That's what he was known for. That's what he started out, was garden design. And he was actually known for his use of native plants. But over time, he became interested in larger scale resource planning. And of course, his work culminated in a national plan. So I'm going to stick with this idea of scale a little more. And I've been thinking about this. When you think of designing at the site scale, that's a scale which, and actually I'm going to pull in Noel Cressy's talk about uncertainty, which his formulas went over my head, but that really resonated with me, the idea of we're in an uncertain world and statistics is a science of uncertainty, and that's what we as planners and designers do, we deal with uncertainty. So the most certainty is at the site scale, but bringing back that idea of impact, that's probably the least amount of impact that you have. You have the most control, most certainty, least amount of impact. Now, I'm going to just throw something out. Folks may disagree with me on this. I feel like right now, if you scale this up, the sweet spot of geodesign practice is at the district or campus scale. And I really actually like Melissa Alexander's lightning talk, where she talked about bringing geodesign to community college practice. But there's this balance of a degree of certainty, a degree of understanding, being able to measure performance and outcomes, versus impact. You're scaling up from the site scale. So just to carry that forward, the scale I'm going to talk about for the remainder of this presentation is the scale of the city, the local government or county, local governmental jurisdiction that do comprehensive plans. And I put this image up is from actually my prior job with WRT, the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan, which was started in 2009 and adopted in 2012. And I was a lead consultant on that project. And to me, this was a project that needed geodesign, could have used geodesign, but actually had it kind of incorporated into the process, so not the technology totally. And just a few words about this. When this process started, it was politically driven by city council. They wanted three things out of this process. They wanted community engagement. They wanted this driven by the values of the community. They wanted sustainability, the content of the plan. They wanted it to be about sustainability, about a sustainable Austin. And the final thing, they wanted to have it to be implemented, in other words, to have impact. So these two images actually, the one on, I guess, your left is one of the scenario building exercises that was done. And these were not done through technology. These were the handcrafted. This was the most complicated chip exercise you ever saw. I could have used that technology. They loved it. And that was actually on your right was the outcome of that, which was their future land use concept or future growth concept. And they called it compact and connected. So let me now just talk about why the comprehensive plan, or it's called the general plan in California. Also, New Jersey calls it still calls it the master plan. You know, why is this so powerful as a vehicle? First of all, it's a legal mandate for decision-making by local governments. Literally thousands of governmental jurisdictions have comprehensive plans. They're constantly updating, preparing new ones. It's the one place at which a city government comprehensively looks long-range. It's visionary. The best ones really stretch the boundaries in addressing the problems they're faces. And this one's key, impact. This is actually implemented. This is the scale at which stuff happens, stuff is implemented, policies, regulations, et cetera, and it scales. This is a scale that scales down and up. So when you think about it, what happens at the district and the site level all flows out of the framework set by the comprehensive plan, and this can also scale up to region, mega region. We're actually exploring, and I'll be talking about the comp plan standards in a moment, taking that concept to the region and mega regional scale. Depends on getting funding. And then, again, Noel's talk, what he was talking about in terms of the global context, I can't wrap my mind around it again, but think about that scale informing and flowing down to the local governmental comprehensive plan would really be amazing. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about first APA Sustaining Places Initiative. It was ambitious. It is ambitious. It was looking at addressing all human settlement issues relating to sustainability. And I want to acknowledge Paul Farmer, who's in the audience somewhere. He started this initiative, announced it with then APA President Bruce Knight, announced it at the World Urban Forum in Rio de Janeiro back in 2010. And I just want to say a word. The definition of sustainability, this is about the triple bottom line, environmental, economic, and social equity with an emphasis on the equity and social equity. So I'm not going to say much more about it other than it really focused on looking at the role of the local government comprehensive plan in promoting sustainability. And fast forward a few years from 2010, the outcome of this is something we refer to as Sustaining Places Comprehensive Plans, or the Comprehensive Plan Standards Framework. And I want to emphasize the word framework here, because these are not standards in the prescriptive sense, which is one reason why I think geodesign has tremendous potential to influence this. It sets a framework or a guidance for communities to integrate sustainability into comprehensive plans. So, and this is, well, let me flip to the next one. These are the components, principles. Now, and I'm not going to read these, but principles, think the substance of the comprehensive plan, the sustainability outcomes that you want out of this. Processes, just that, think process. Think about developing and implementing a plan as an ongoing process. And then attributes, think about how the plan is designed and constructed and communicated and presented. And then the last component cuts across all three. These are actually the standards themselves, the best practices, and they're meant as guidance for communities to realize all three of these components. You can see these go beyond sustainability to address the entire palette of comprehensive planning practice. So I'm going to go through, I can only give you a taste of these in the time that I have. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, or very quickly. Starting with the plan principles, there are 6 of these, so you can see livable built environment, harmony with nature, et cetera, interwoven equity, responsible regionalism. I'm not going to talk about those, but look at those. And just as an example, I'm going to talk about livable built environment. And again, without reading this, think about the Austin example, compact and connected. So the traditional comprehensive plan would have had the land use, transportation, housing, all these elements. Compact and connected was their concept of the built environment, the land use and the transportation system working together, supporting fiscal health, et cetera. I love the slides we saw earlier about Austin. I thought the analysis aligned with that land use concept or growth concept I showed you earlier. So it's an integrated view of the built environment. Now, each of these principles has a series of best practices, and I'm not going to go through this list. What I did was I circled a few here and there that I thought particularly might have relevance for geodesign, or think about geodesign tools and applications. So, for example, plan for mixed land use patterns that are walkable and bikeable. You know, the presentations we saw this morning from the Esri Geodesign team, Eric and the others, you know, fabulous stuff that can be brought to bear on this and measure performance in terms of sustainability. There are two plan processes, and I'm actually going to talk about both of these because these are really important. The first deals with community engagement in the process, which is ongoing and moves into implementation, the outcomes of the plan. They're very interrelated. So authentic participation, obviously engaging the community. The values of the community are what drive the process throughout the planning process and into implementation. And here are the best practices. And there's some no-brainers here for geodesign. You know, provide ongoing and understandable information for all participants. Bring science and evidence to the planning process. And the potential, the possibilities in terms of building some scenarios, engaging citizens, getting real-time feedback on those are tremendous. And we saw really David Early yesterday showed us some examples from actually a general planning process here in California. Accountable implementation, and this is about setting priorities, assigning responsibilities, securing resources, making commitments, and then measuring and taking metrics to evaluate progress in implementation. This is where the impact of the plan comes. So here are here are the series of best practices. You know, I circled the no-brainer for me on this one was establishing implementation indicators, benchmarks based on evidence, and the power. Think about tying this to the scenario development. So during the planning process, citizens are working with, for example, growth management scenarios. They see the impacts in terms of indicators. A preferred alternative comes through, and then you take this through and measure indicators and use that over, say, a 5-year implementation program and use that to adjust the program moving forward. And I actually wanted to pause here and say a word about money, because that's the heart and the basis of all this. And I agree with the presentations that we've seen on this. The fiscal impact analysis and the ability to integrate that in the planning process, we did that a little bit in Austin, but not to the sophisticated level that we've seen in some of the presentations over the last day or so. Finally, plan attributes. And I sometimes have a hard time explaining this, but I also think this is like really great unexplored territory. This is really about how do you design the plan, take it beyond the document, so it holds together, it's coherent, it's transparent, and you also communicate to your audience, to your stakeholders. You can engage in them. It goes beyond being a document, which you'll see in a minute, to being really something that's living. We use the word living document, but it's more than that. So just one of the examples, coordinated characteristics. And again, this is about a plan that's coordinated, integrated. I'd rather use the word integrated here. It scales up and down, is transparent, and is communicated, the idea of communicating to your audiences. So there's an image here actually from the City of Albany comprehensive plan, which was interesting. I served as a consultant for that as well, and that they took a different point of view. They actually took a systems point of view. So a traditional comprehensive plan, again, has standalone elements. They took their vision components that they got through public input and thought about them as in terms of interrelated systems. And I love what Mark did with Donella Meadows. That's one of my favorite books. Everyone should read it if you haven't. We actually used that book to kind of figure out what the systems approach might look for comprehensive planning. How am I doing on time, Tom? Good. Okay, so here are some of the best practices for coordinated characteristics. Be transparent in the plan substance. I heard that word black box yesterday, which has always been the problem with traditional planning modeling. You're not quite sure. These experts go in a room somewhere and they come out with the results. Again, with a cloud-based and the availability of information, Geodesign has a tremendous opportunity to make the plan transparent. And another no-brainer, forget the 300-page plan document. They make great doorstops. But there are other ways of presenting that. And think about, you get to a point of, I'm not sure how this would work, but you get to the point of an adopted plan. Again, it's not static, but can that somehow be interactive? In other words, could you take the interactive component of preparing the plan and move that through in the implementation? I wanted to just say a word about how we developed these standards. We actually field tested them on the ground, and we worked with a series of 10 communities. And we actually also, there's a scoring system that you can rate how your comp plan measures up that we developed with this. And Austin was one of the ones that we used on that. But the point I wanted to make on this slide is you can see these communities vary dramatically in terms of type of jurisdiction, location, and particularly size. And I wanted to point out several of these. Wheeling, West Virginia, Goshen, Indiana, Rock Island, Illinois. These are small communities. Midwest, some of them are rather conservative. New Hanover County, North Carolina. And they all worked with their citizens. They were all actually preparing comprehensive plans while we were developing and finalizing these standards. And they tested and used them in their planning processes. And they found them incredibly useful. And to me, that's a measure of impact because you're going to expect the Austins of the world and Seattle, they're going to be progressive. They're going to be early adopters. But if this kind of system can work in other communities, I think it's got tremendously powerful. So that's one reason why I'm quite excited about this initiative. And I am a PA research director, so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention a couple of products related to this. These are PAS reports. The Sustaining Places, the Role of the Comprehensive Plan, was the first one that actually produced in 2012. They kind of laid out the general framework principles, some leading edge plans. And then the next one, which is actually at the printer now, Sustaining Places, Best Practices for Comprehensive Plans. I actually co-authored that with Dave Gottschalk. It's a professor emeritus in the School of City and Regional Planning at UNC Chapel Hill. He's been instrumental in this. So that's at the printer. And actually in February, it should be available. And that lays out the whole system in much more detail that I just went over in a few minutes. Okay, so that brings me to the last part of my presentation. And again, thinking about that, I would have relabeled this slide. It's not how can geodesign impact comprehensive planning, but how can geodesign have impact through the vehicle of comprehensive planning. That's a subtle distinction, but I think it's an important one to make. And I'm going to talk about this through the lens of public health. So, and I'm going to return to this theme of professions were connected in the same thing initially. It wasn't just landscape architecture and city and regional planning. It was also the public health profession. And the pioneers in public health were figures like Frederick Law Olmsted and Jane Addams, a well-known social reformer of the time, and the city planner. But actually, these two people, and the one point I wanted to make about these, kind of set the direction for these professions to diverge and go in different directions. In other words, Olmsted focused on physical design as a solution to environmental health issues, and Jane Addams focused on social advocacy. She's famous for the Hull House, and really caring for the plight of the people that were, the less fortunate in society in the urban environment. So I want to flash forward 100 or more years. We now all have different professional associations. And the public health profession is a well-established profession. And I love public health because it has this base in evidence, but it has a strong, I'll say passionate social advocacy. That same strain is carried through. And I'm actually a proud member of all three associations, APA, ASLA, and APHA. But I want to make this one point about APHA. At their annual conference back in New Orleans back in November, they came out with a new vision, a long-term vision for the public health profession to make the United States the healthiest nation in the world in one generation. That's like really a dramatic vision if you think about it, particularly if you look at my next slide, which is the reality. Our national life expectancies, these are figures that are sourced, of the US in 2011 was 37th in the world, going in the wrong direction. Back in 1960, we were 16th. Chronic diseases have replaced infectious diseases as our new health epidemics. Infectious diseases are the issue they were dealing with back in the late 19th century. And particularly, I don't have to dwell on these figures of obesity from CDC. We all know these figures. And the next one is particularly troubling to me in terms of health disparities affecting underserved groups. These are images from the Cuyahoga County Health Department, Cuyahoga County being the county that Cleveland is in. You can see these figures, but particularly stark is the disparity in life expectancy between two neighborhoods that are maybe 2.5 miles apart, one rich, one poor. I don't think I have to point out which is which. 24 years difference in life expectancy, and these figures are adjusted for other factors. So I think that's kind of why our life expectancy as a whole may be going down in terms of the world rankings, one reason. So what do we do about this? And acting surgeon Boris Lushniak was a keynote speaker at the National Planning Conference in 2014 in Atlanta, gave really a stirring speech. And he recognizes, and the public health profession recognized, it's going to take more than public health professionals to deal with this issue. So what he did is he said that we need to move the nation from a focus on sickness and disease to one based on prevention and wellness. And he made this stirring call that really energized the conference. He called upon the APA to deputize planners for this mission. And so I'm going to just now return to the Sustaining Places, the Comprehensive Plan Standards. The fifth one has to do with healthy communities. And I want to think about this or talk about this in the context of the mission of public health, tie it to the public health profession, because the mission of public health is defined by the Institute of Medicine, is to assure society's interests in creating conditions in which people can be healthy. So think about that. That's really powerful. That's not just about public health profession. It's about what planners and designers, what we all want to do. And the thing about this healthy communities principle, it addresses sort of the issues related to that, but it's also all those other principles that I talked about earlier, I just listed earlier, the livable built environment, et cetera, they all contribute to this. So you bring those all together, you have a healthy community, and you need a resilient economy, job opportunities as well. So just think about this. This gets to the transdisciplinary theme that I started out talking about, bringing different disparate disciplines together, engineers, planners, architects, landscape architects around this theme. So I want to end this just wondering what if Rear Admiral Lushniak deputized geodesigners for the public health mission. And he may have done this because I found out afterwards, it wasn't just planners. He said he did this with architects. He's been around. Has he been in Esri, Shannon? No, he didn't make it. You lost your chance. He's not Surgeon General anymore. But let's just think about that. Deputizing geodesigners for the public health mission. What would that look like? So I just listed some thoughts here on this slide. Public health is an evidence-based profession. So there's so much potential to think about those public health data that's out there around obesity, diabetes, different diseases. How does that link to built environment conditions? Engagement. Think about bringing that public health message or issues into the scenario development process. Well, what would the outcomes be for public health around certain scenarios? Implementation, so again, tying that to implementation, establishing health indicators to prioritize investments, monitor progress. And then impact, and I want to emphasize this one, the idea of scaling up and down. There's things I've learned from my public health colleagues. They call it health information technologies. And what this is really about is the fact that you have smartphone applications and things on the ground that can, these Fitbit applications are an example of this, but that can inform and generate information about what's happening in terms of population health at the neighborhood scale. And it happens that poor and people of color tend to have smartphones at least as much as more affluent people. So think about the opportunities to integrate that kind of information at the neighborhood scale to make an impact. So I want to close, and thank you for bearing with me here, but I gave public health as an example, but you could go through one problem after another and think about this. They're all interrelated. So think about the implications for climate change and resilience, for example. And actually, just yesterday, I was looking at the internet this morning, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists just advanced the doomsday clock 2 minutes closer to midnight, from 5 minutes to 3 minutes before midnight, not because of the threat of nuclear war, but because of the existential threat of climate change. So I think what I'd like to close with is just think about that. The need is enormous. The challenges are enormous for all of us, but the opportunity is enormous as well. So I'd like to see if we could figure out a way to make this all happen. Thank you.
Thank you, David.